When the British East India Company first showed up in India in the 17th century, they were vastly outnumbered by the native Indians. But with the help of some local allies and a fair bit of manipulation, they managed to defeat many powerful Indian kingdoms and establish their own rule over large parts of the subcontinent. This did not come without its complications, however, and after centuries of bitter resentment, several Indian kingdoms united to fight back against the so-called White King and his army of foreigners. The result was the Anglo-Sikh Wars, a conflict that would define the fate of Punjab and the future of the British Empire. So today, let's talk about the Anglo-Sikh Wars between the British East India Company and the Sikhs. A quick reminder before we start that this is episode number 6 in our series covering the many wars of the British Empire. So if you haven't already, then do check out previous episodes as well. The Sikh Empire was one of the last great independent powers in India. At its peak during the early 19th century, it controlled much of the Punjab region, parts of Kashmir, and even extended all the way to the borders of China. The Sikhs were militaristic by nature and had built a strong military tradition through constant warfare since the foundation of their empire in the 15th century. They also had one of the most disciplined and well-trained armies in the world. And it was no surprise that when the British came to power in India, the Sikhs were among the first to resist. In the beginning, the Sikhs fought against the British indirectly, supporting various other Indian states, which were also resisting British expansion. However, tensions escalated dramatically in 1809, when the British began to take an interest in the Sikh kingdom of Punjab itself. The British wanted to make Punjab a part of their growing empire, and they began to pressure the Sikh ruler to sign a treaty that would open up the Sikh kingdom to trade and allow British troops to be stationed there. The Sikhs refused to comply, however, and war soon broke out. The First Anglo-Sikh War lasted from 1845 to 1846. It began when British forces invaded the Sikh kingdom of Punjab in 1845. They quickly captured several key cities and forced the Sikh ruler to flee. Despite being outnumbered, the Sikhs fought bravely against the British, but they were eventually defeated and forced to sign the Treaty of Lahore in 1846. Under the treaty, the Sikhs lost half of their territory to the British, who also gained control over the lucrative trade in opium and other goods. Despite their defeat, the Sikhs refused to submit and soon began planning for another war. Tensions between the Sikhs and the British continued to grow throughout the 1840s. The British were eager to expand their empire in India, and the Sikhs were determined to resist. In 1848, the Sikhs revolted and launched a full-scale war against the British. This conflict became known as the Second Anglo-Sikh War. The war was fought over a period of 5 years from 1848 to 1852. The Sikhs were once again outnumbered, but they were determined to win their freedom from British rule. The war was brutal and bloody, and both sides committed atrocities against each other. However, the Sikhs were eventually defeated and forced to sign the Treaty of Amritsar in 1849. Under the treaty, the Sikhs lost even more territory to the British and were forbidden from having an army. But the story doesn't end there. After the Second Sikh War, the British found themselves ruling over a vast but unruly empire. They needed a way to keep their subjects in line and prevent future rebellions. So they turned to divide and conquer tactics, pitting different regions and peoples against one another. They also introduced a new system of governance, which stripped away many of the traditional powers of local rulers. In Punjab, they imposed direct rule and replaced the old Sikh government with a new one loyal to the crown. Many of the Sikhs viewed this as a betrayal and a violation of the terms of the treaty, and simmering resentment began to grow once again. By the late 1850s, tensions were high and the Sikhs were preparing for another uprising. Then, in 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion broke out. This was a major uprising against the British East India Company, in which Indian soldiers and some civilians took arms against their foreign rulers. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, it left the British shaken and looking for a way to prevent future uprisings. In Punjab, the British were suspicious of the Sikhs and their potential to rebel. They began to crack down on Sikh religious practices and institutions, which further enraged the Sikh people. By the early 1870s, the situation had become so tense that the British were forced to station a large number of troops in Punjab to keep the Sikhs under control. Then in 1878, war broke out between the British and the Afghans. The British wanted to expand their empire into Afghanistan, but the Afghans resisted. The Sikhs saw this as an opportunity to rebel against the British. In April of 1878, a group of Sikh soldiers stationed in the British Army mutinied. They were joined by thousands of Sikh civilians who began to attack British installations across Punjab. The rebellion quickly spread to other parts of India, such as Kashmir and the central provinces. Soon, entire villages and towns were in open revolt against the British. The British were caught off guard by the speed and intensity of the rebellion. They were forced to scramble to put down the uprising. They sent troops from other parts of their empire to India to help suppress the rebellion. The Sikhs were eventually defeated, however, and the rebellion was put down by the mid-1880s. The British responded by cracking down even harder on Sikh religious and political institutions. They also stationed even more troops in Punjab to keep the Sikhs under control. Despite the setback, the Sikhs continued to resist British rule in Punjab. They used guerrilla tactics to harass the British and their collaborators. They also began to organize themselves into political parties to demand independence from British rule. The most notable of these parties was the Shiromani Akali Dal, which was founded in 1920. The Sikhs continued to resist British rule until India gained independence in 1947. The Anglo-Sikh Wars were a pivotal moment in the history of both the Sikhs and the British Empire. The wars resulted in the deaths of thousands of soldiers and civilians and left a lasting legacy of bitterness and resentment between the two sides. The wars also had a profound impact on the course of Indian history. They marked the end of the Mughal Empire and the beginning of British domination in India. The Anglo-Sikh Wars are a lesser-known but important part of the history of the British Empire. They were a brutal and bloody conflict that resulted in the death of thousands of soldiers and civilians. The wars also had a profound impact on the course of Indian history and the role of the British in the region. If you enjoyed this episode, then please consider supporting us. And as always, thank you for watching.